So of course, everything is coordinated smaller. Does that make sense? Okay? To its proportion. Another difference is that artery has great amount of elastic fibers within the muscular layer. But arterial has skeletal fibers, but they are very few. Okay? There's a less amount compared to artery. Another significant importance is the arterial does not have a connective tissue layer, so it lacks the outermost layer. Okay? Does that make sense? So it lacks the outermost layer. Okay. Now, function of a venule basically carries deoxygenated blood. Okay. It has the same exact structure of a vein. So I'm not going to draw it. It has the same exact structure of a vein, but everything is just smaller proportionally. Okay? If our vein was this big, our venule is this big, but all of its layers are exactly the same, just smaller in proportion. Yes? Yes. Venule and a vein exactly looks the same in structure. The only difference is that a venule is much smaller. Therefore, all of the layers are much smaller in proportion. Does that make sense? But otherwise, it looks exactly the same. Okay. I'm going fast because heart, there's a lot of stuff to cover. Okay? Now, mechanism assists ways to, actually, let's cancel this one out. Okay, now capillaries. Function of capillaries. This is a site where exchange occurs between tissue and capillaries, okay? So this is a site. From an artery, from an arterial or venule, nothing is being exchanged between the vessel and the tissue site. Does that make sense? Capillary is the site that allows exchange to occur. Okay? So exchange of gases, exchange of nutrients. Okay? So nutrients can mean oxygen, could mean ions, okay, etc. Basically all the nutrients that our cell needs. It goes from a capillary, okay, it goes from a capillary into tissue. Does that make sense? Yes.
So it allows exchange between
The vessel, which is the capillary, and tissues. Okay? And from tissues, it's waste products. Waste goes from the tissue and enters the capillaries. Does that make sense? So nutrients go from the capillary and enter the tissues, where waste products goes from tissues and enters the capillaries. This is where exchange is able to occur. Okay? Waste products could mean carbon dioxide. Yes?
Is it the same capillaries for both? Like,
Yes.
okay.
Now, the structure of capillary. So exchange between capillaries and cells. Structure. Only contain endothelium layer. A capillary is only an endothelial layer. They don't have a muscle layer, they don't have a connective tissue layer. Okay? Now, right here is a capillary, right? And basically, it's a lumen, right? Or right here is a lumen. This is where the blood would be. Here's one cell, here's another cell, third cell, fourth cell, fifth cell. Does that make sense? That's epithelium, epithelium, epithelium. Here's another cell, another cell. Okay? Now, if I actually take one cell or two cells and if I enlarge it, now I have kept a space right there for purpose. There is a reason for it. Now, so I've taken 3 cells and I have basically enlarged them because the capillary endothelium actually has little holes. These holes are called pores. So basically these have little holes. Now, these holes are called pores. What is the purpose? Anything that is small enough can exit the pores because remember exchange has to occur between cells and the vessel, right? So how does something escape? How is it able to go through? Well, basically anything that is small enough, water, small ions, can go in and out. So oxygen can leave these holes and enter the tissue, go towards the tissue. Carbon dioxide can go this way. Does that make sense? Okay? So it's like these windows where stuff can go in and out. Okay? Yes.
So the pores are where whatever's being exchanged, that's where they can leave and
Yes.
exit?
Yes. If it's small enough. Okay? Now if something is big enough, so a red blood cell is too big to cross. Platelets are too big to cross. White blood cells are too big to cross. Therefore, you know, proteins, white blood cells, all that stays within the capillary, it doesn't leak out. But anything that's small enough, glucose, amino acids, ions, okay, gases, those are small enough fluids can cross through. Does that make sense? Okay? Now what happens if you, let's say you have an infection in tissue and white blood cell needs to escape and enter the tissue. But the white blood cell is too big to cross through these pores. What happens is basically between each endothelial cell, between them, you have a small space. That space is called a slit. Okay? Slit. So between the endothelial cells are not back to back like this. There's a little space between them. And that space is called a slit. Just in case a white blood cell or something bigger needs to cross through, they have to squeeze through this slit and enter. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Now, basically, now we're going to actually start talking about, we finished talking about the blood vessels, now we're going to start talking about the heart. This is just an image for you guys to see actually the open chest. Okay. I don't know, how far are you guys in the pigs? What have you guys done? I'm like, you just skinned it? You haven't opened the pig yet?
No, the spinal cord is on the thing.
No, we haven't.
No, we
haven't.
We had a lab canceled basically because of the fire.
Okay. Oh, you guys had the last week, right? Yeah, but the fire was last week, correct?
Two weeks ago.
There was another fire on I-15 last week. Okay, so basically what happened last week is I had the same clothes on for 3 days. Okay? Because that Monday when I left to go back home, because there was a fire on 15, I couldn't get through. Nobody could enter my town, so I just turned around when there was a, you could turn around on 15 from 15 on to get things out. I just went to my sister's. I had nothing on me. So for 3 days, I wore the same stuff. And students who came for tutoring Tuesday class, they saw me on Tuesday with the same clothes, and you could hear them whispering, "Is she wearing the same clothes?" So I started my lecture. I'm like, "Yes, I am wearing the same exact clothes." And they saw me on Wednesday for tutoring. Yes, I am again wearing the same clothes because Tuesdays I told you I have a 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock class. 7 in the morning till 11. I'm in college. Anyway. So basically this is the heart, okay? Okay, so here's the heart. Okay? These are the lungs. This is the liver right here. Right here is diaphragm on it. So liver, the diaphragm on it, the heart, the lung, the second lung is underneath, right there. These are the ribs which are cut through. Okay? So I'm just trying to show you these are perfect hands.
What do you call it?
Diaphragm.
Oh.
The diaphragm, the liver, the intercostal muscles, the ribs, the lung, the heart. Now, do you guys remember what the pericardium was? When we talked about, I think first week, we were talking about membranes. It's a connective tissue layer, okay? Pericardium is connective tissue. Location, it basically encloses the heart. As you can see, here's the heart, and this gray thing that you can pull away, that is the pericardium. So the pericardium, basically, it surrounds or encloses the heart, like it forms like a sac. Okay? So the heart is found within the pericardial sac, which is made of pericardium. The function is basically protection. Okay? Anytime you have a connective tissue covering, it's for protection. Now, do you guys remember the pericardium actually had 2 layers, right? The visceral, which actually touches the heart tissue itself, and then you have the parietal layer, which actually is towards the chest wall. And between the 2 layers, you have a thin space, a vacuum, okay? And that vacuum is there to allow that structure to expand, okay? So basically, when the heart fills with blood, it expands, and there that pericardium.
Intrapericardial space.
Yes, I was like, interpericardial space is used for that expansion, okay? So, composition, connective tissue, function, protection, location, it encloses the heart. It forms a pericardial sac in which you find the heart. You have 2 layers, the visceral layer and the parietal layer, and then there's a space between the 2, and that space is used for expansion, so the heart can fill with blood. If something else gets into that vacuum, that space, basically the heart cannot expand, and it cannot fill with blood. Yes.
What's this space for? Between the 2?
It allows it to expand. Now, the heart structure. Now, let me draw first, and then you guys draw. Okay? Go ahead and draw that and then we'll label it. It's not that hard to draw, so please do it quick. I'm giving you a minute. We still have a lot to cover.
Is it the green around the entire thing?
This?
Is it supposed to be thicker on that side?
Okay, say that again.
Is the green supposed to be thicker on one side or is it the same one?
No, I particularly did it this way. So this is the thickest, then this, and then this. Okay. Now, the heart basically contains 4 chambers. The top 2 chambers are called atria. The bottom 2 chambers are called ventricles. Now, depending on the side we're talking about, so let's say this is the right side and let's say this is the left side, okay? This is called the right atrium. This is called the left atrium. This is called the right ventricle. This is called the left ventricle, okay? These are the 4 chambers of the heart. The top 2 chambers are atria, the bottom 2 chambers are ventricles. They're named according to the sun. Now, between the atria and the ventricles, okay, basically right here, this green thing is a valve. Valve is a door, okay? It separates, think of these chambers as rooms. Each room is separated by a door, right, which opens and closes. So these doors within the heart are called valves, V-A-L-V-E-S. Because these valves are located between the atria and the ventricle, both of these are called the atrial ventricular valves. Atrial ventricular valves or the AV valves, okay? So between the atria and the ventricles, you have the AV valve. You have the right AV valve and you have the left AV valve. AV stands for atrioventricular valve. Okay? They're little doors. Now, you will notice the atria are always penetrated via vessels. So vessels usually penetrate the atria and drain blood into it. Where the ventricles, there's always an outgoing vessel because blood will always go this way. Okay? So this is superior vena cava. This is inferior vena cava. Okay? So superior vena cava and inferior vena cava drain blood into the right atrium. Now the right ventricle drains blood into the pulmonary trunk. The left atrium is pierced by a vessel that drains blood into the left atrium, which is called the pulmonary vein. The left ventricle sends an outgoing vessel which drains blood, and this is the aorta. Yes?
So the blue vessels are transferring blood out.
No. Basically, atria always receive blood from vessels. Ventricles always give off blood. Okay, atria receive blood from vessels, where ventricles always give blood to a vessel. Okay. Between the ventricle and the outgoing vessel, you have a valve once again. You have a valve right here and a valve right here. These are basically like doors. Okay. Now these valves, they are called semi-lunar valves. These are called the semi-lunar valve. You have a right semi-lunar valve and you have a left semi-lunar valve. Okay? So basically, the atria and ventricles are separated by valves, which are called the AV valves. The ventricles and the outgoing vessel are separated by valves, which are called the semi-lunar valves. The vessels that penetrate the atria, there is no valves. Okay, they're just really open and they drain blood. Now the right side of the heart is separated by the left side of the heart by a wall. Okay, you know doors or windows open, right? But does a wall open? No. So this wall is called a septum. The wall, right up here, wall is called a septum. S-E-P-T-U-M, septum. If the septum is separating the two ventricles, it's separating the right ventricle to the left ventricle, it's called the interventricular septum. Interventricular septum. Okay? So this part right here is interventricular septum. If the septum, the wall, is separating into atria, it's called interatrial septum. Interatrial septum. Does that make sense? So you have a septum. If the septum is separating two ventricles, interventricular septum. If it's separating the two atria, interatrial septum. Who's ever watched the movie John Q? Okay. Students who haven't watched John Q. Basically, this is young, I think probably 12-year-old boy, something like that. And he basically is playing basketball or something and then he collapses. They take him to the ER and they notice that basically his heart is greatly enlarged and now he has heart failure. His heart, he's only a 12-year-old boy and his heart is like a dog size. The reason is because what happened is he had a hole within his heart. Okay? The hole is actually right here. The hole is right here. The wall actually has a hole. Okay? And because of that hole, blood is going through and it causes problems. So basically, this little boy, 12-year-old, because now his heart is giving up, is failing, he needs a heart transplant. Okay? And basically the movie is that they can't find a transplant because they don't have enough money or something. I don't remember exactly now, but his dad takes the hospital under hostage and they tell the doctor and everything to do the surgery. But that's basically what it was. There is a hole. Now this hole is normal in fetus, in a fetal lifetime when you're all in the mother's womb. This hole is normally there. Okay? But as soon as you take your first breath, so it's like this, the wall, okay? Here's the septum, here's interatrial septum, here's interatrial septum. The interatrial septum has a little space between it. Therefore, because in fetal life, your lungs don't work.